All right, I believe we are live. I want to say good
Hang on,
evening and
hang
thank
on.
you.
Not yet.
It's live in Zoom, but not on YouTube yet.
We're now live, everyone.
Well, good evening and thank you for joining us. My name is Judy Peterson and I serve as the Public Information Officer for the Fairfax County Park Authority. Welcome to our virtual community meeting on the Lake Accotink Dredging Project. This is a staff-led virtual public meeting, and although we do have a member of the Board of Supervisors and Park Authority board members in attendance, I want to reiterate that this is a community meeting and our elected and appointed officials will not be voting at this meeting on any part of this project. Their part tonight is to be listening to your input. With that said, I want the record to note that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this meeting to only be physically held in person, and the usual procedures cannot be implemented safely or practically. As a result, this meeting will be conducted electronically through dedicated video and audio conferencing, and the public may access this meeting through public input through the link found on the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services Lake Accotink Dredging page. The public can also participate by phone by calling 855-925-2801 and then entering the meeting code 8809. Well, now that we've completed some of those formalities, we can begin our program. Tonight, I'm facilitating this meeting hosted by DPWES in cooperation with the Park Authority, Arcadis, and WSSI staff, and of course, the Board of Supervisors. Our arrangement tonight is a bit unique, but then again, this project is also unique. As you may be aware, we held an in-person meeting last week at Annandale High School, and we received lots of comments. Our goal tonight is to present a project update, to inform you about the details which really matter, and then to hear from you. Let me acquaint you with how our virtual platform works and how you can participate. That's what I will call our virtual meeting tutorial. So for the duration of this meeting, we will be accepting comments and questions in the public input chat box. If you cannot see the chat, we ask you to please refresh your webpage. Should you wish to dial in and speak to us over the phone, please call the number located right above this video, 855-925-2801, and then enter the code above the video, 8809. Once you dial in, the recorded message will ask you to press star for more options. And if you want to join the speaker queue, press option 3. And that will pop you into the speaker queue, but it's still going to allow you to listen to the message and to the meeting. Okay. At this point, you may want to step away from your computer if you're also joining us there, because there is a delay and it can really be kind of confusing. Plus, we may hear ourselves twice through your phone. When it is your turn in the queue to speak, we will let you know. We're ready for your call, and the pre-recorded voice will prompt you that it is your turn. At that time, you'll be able to state your name for the accessibility requirements and make your comments or ask us a question. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll give you a 30-second warning that you're nearing your time. We'll ask people to remain on topic. And one thing I promise is I will explain all that again, because I know it's a little bit confusing. It's really not, but it sounds that way. And I also want to remind you that this meeting is going to be recorded, and then it'll be posted on the DPWES project website. And that's also where you can offer further written comment. And we also want to tell you, if you want to leave your email, we would appreciate that. That will help us to build our list to be sure that we can include you in future information output and about other meetings. So let me state again, it's really a pleasure to be here. And let me welcome some of our online guests. First, Braddock District Supervisor James Walkinshaw and his staff members. From WDP-WES, Project Manager Charles Smith. We have Justin Pistori and Susan Larcher. From Arcadis, we have Mike Wooden, Frank Graziano, Akshay Kumar, and Amanda Kohler. And from the Park Authority, we have Valerie Maislin, and we also have Adam Wynn, Don Tubell, and Hannah Krass. Some of the others I want to mention, Chris Harrington, Director, Ellie Cotting, Deputy Director for Stormwater and Wastewater, Craig Carinci, Director, Stormwater Planning Division, Amy Vosper, Deputy Director of the Park Authority, Marcia Pape with the Supervisor's Office, Chris Becker from Manager of the Lakefronts, Dan Grolke, Manager of Lake Accotink Park, John Burke, Natural Resources Branch Manager, Cindy Walsh, Director of Park Services Division, and then of course there's you. That's the easiest one to pronounce apparently for me this evening. The constituents that are joining us tonight, because we want to hear the information about the project, and then we want to hear from you. So let me get things rolling with welcoming remarks from the supervisor. Supervisor?
Thank you, Judy. Thank you all for joining, and I want to thank the entire team that put this meeting together. For the second time, we had one go around in person, and they now have pulled off a virtual meeting as well. So the Park Authority and DPWES, WSSI, and Arcadis, Marcia Pape from my office, and our stakeholders group that's been working on this project for some time. Thank you all for your work. We're here tonight to talk about Lake Accotink, which is one of Fairfax County's premier recreational assets. We have almost 300,000 visitors annually at Lake Accotink, and I'm sure most of you participating tonight have been to the park and seen the lake and seen the recreational value that it provides for our county and for our region. But it's also an environmental asset, both in terms of the habitat that it provides, but also sediment capture. And we're here to talk about the sediment in the lake and the fact that it's rapidly filling up and the need to dredge the lake and some of the cost and some of the challenges in doing that. But it's also important for us to remember that there's an environmental cost of doing nothing when it comes to Lake Accotink, because if we were to allow the lake to fill in, the sediment that's currently being captured would flow downstream throughout the rest of the county and ultimately into the Chesapeake Bay. And I think because of those factors, the community spoke very clearly in 2019 that they wanted to save this lake, and the county, led by the previous Board of Supervisors and my predecessor, Supervisor Cook, and then lead district supervisor, now Chairman Jeff McKay, were able to convince their colleagues to approve the application of a $30 million for $30 million in funds from the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund. Just last week, at my request, the Board of Supervisors approved an additional $30 million application through that revolving loan fund. So the Board of Supervisors remains committed to this project. And we're here tonight to talk about exactly how it can get done. And I think one thing that I've tried to be very clear about over the last couple of years is that there will be impacts during the dredging of this lake. There will be some disruption, especially for those of us who live around the lake or in the surrounding communities. That's the reality. We're here tonight to share the work and the analysis, pretty substantial work and analysis that's been done so far, to answer your questions and get your feedback. And my hope is that through this process and through the continued dialogue that we're going to have as a community, we can come to a consensus around the best approach and work together to get through the impacts and the disruptions that are certain to happen during the project. But when it's said and done, we will have an even more beautiful lake than we have now in Lake Accotink. So I'll wrap up there. I look forward to seeing the presentation, and I'll turn it back to you, Judy.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. I'm glad to say that we have more than 60 people who have joined us so far. That's very encouraging. We know how important this is. It's now time for an overview that will acquaint you with the planning process and the master plan history, provide some information about schedules and the plans for moving forward. I would ask you to please hold your questions until our Q&A session, please. And now, please welcome Project Manager Charles Smith.
Thank you, Judy. Appreciate it. I also want to, before I get started just to remind folks that we realize there's a lot of information we're going to present tonight. And we know that many of you have not had the opportunity to see this. We hope you'll look at the alternatives analysis documents posted on the project webpage. But please take advantage of the question period to ask any questions. There are no silly questions, so please do that. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. Next slide, please. So I wanted to remind folks how we got here. The Park Authority launched a master planning process in 2016 to look at the alternatives for Lake Accotink Park. As part of that, the analysis that went into that, we looked back at former management, and that was looking at over 40 years of public ownership, or at least county ownership. There have been 3 dredging cycles that had occurred. And the last time we dredged it was in 2008, 2009, that time frame. We knew from analysis coming into the Park Authority's master planning process, about 20,000 cubic yards of material are accumulating in the lake every year, and the average lake depth now is less than 4 feet. So through that master planning process, what came out were different management options. And what we learned was that the public overwhelmingly supported keeping a lake. And that was the impetus for moving forward with option B at the time, which was to continue the current dredging program. So the Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Walkinshaw indicated, approved an initial funding amount, or at least application for an initial loan amount of $30.5 million in 2019. As he also stated last week, the board approved us to move forward with an application for an additional $30 million. I'll remind folks that these funds, if the second $30 million are approved, it's not money that we will spend. It's just money that will be made available by the state should we need to spend it. So that's the important distinction. Next slide, please. So this project is of a different scale than the previous dredging. We're going to take out, we think, about 500,000 cubic yards of material. It's a tremendous amount of material. In order to do that, we can't put it someplace and leave it. We have to actually pump it to a location where we can dewater the material and then haul it away to dispose of it. There's potential for some reuse, but it's a very complex process. In addition, we have to establish a maintenance dredging program, because now we know this lake is filling in rather rapidly from all the sediment that comes from the watershed above. And we'll need to do maintenance dredging on a regular basis. We're not sure exactly what the interval will be, but that'll be part of this program, or this project, is to decide on the interval that we need to come back and do maintenance dredging. And of course, this is largely to retain the aesthetic and recreational value of the lake, and it does remove sediment from the Accotink system. Next slide, please. In order to conduct the project, our team is composed of public staff from the Department of Public Works and the Park Authority, as well as staff from Supervisor Walkinshaw's office, and our Arcadis team, which includes staff from Arcadis and Wetland Studies and Solutions, and then key stakeholders that we've been consulting with over the last year. That include the Friends of Lake Accotink Park, Friends of Accotink Creek, Save Lake Accotink, multiple civic and homeowners associations, and the Mid-Atlantic off-road enthusiasts. Next slide, please. So we're at a critical juncture. The alternatives analysis that you're going to hear about in a moment is the upfront look at where we can do different activities and how we can conduct them in order to do the project. So this is our critical time to hear from you not only to inform you what we've learned, but also hear from you about the things that are most important to you related to the activities around the dredging. Once we get all the feedback in August 22nd is the closing time for the public comment. We will try to make decisions in a rapid way, working with the Park Authority Board and Board of Supervisors, and then report back out. We give direction to Arcadis to move forward with design. So sometime next spring, they should have a concept plan developed. And that concept plan will let us know a lot more about the costs associated with this project and how to conduct the project. And then by 2023, about a year after that, we will be completed with design and permitting and begin dredging sometime in 2023. We anticipate a 3-year dredge cycle. And then after dredging is completed, we'll actually have to monitor the lake as part of a permitting process, monitoring the different areas that we have impacted and or restored as related to the project. And I believe with that, it's my last slide, and I'll turn it back over to Judy.
Thank you very much. I now want to welcome our technical experts, including Mike Wooden and Amanda Kohler from Arcadis, Frank Graziano from WSSI. Amanda is going to present the findings from the alternatives analysis. Again, I would ask you to please hold your questions until the moderated Q&A. Go ahead, Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Judy, and thank you everyone for taking time to be here. As Judy mentioned, my name is Amanda Kohler, and I am a senior environmental engineer at Arcadis. Next slide. So as mentioned, we'll be presenting on the results of the alternatives analysis that was performed by Arcadis and WSSI. The results of that analysis is included in the alternatives analysis report that is posted to the project website. So for sort of the outline for this presentation, we are going to follow the general outline of the alternatives analysis report, starting with a brief introduction of background information that's covered in sections 1 through 3 of the report. Then we'll touch on proof of concept screening performed on dredging, dewatering, and disposal methods. Then we'll move on to a summary of the environmental and cultural resource evaluation performed. And then the bulk of the conversation will be related to the discussion on the development and analysis of the different project alternatives, which focus on the potential dewatering locations and pipeline alignments. Next slide. So I won't cover too much of this since Charles did previously mention the overall sort of scope of the project and the objectives that went into the alternatives analysis. So I will reiterate that one of the things that Charles did mention, the main difference between this project and previous dredging events is that maintenance dredging component. So as we were evaluating the different alternatives, we were considering how the areas that are chosen for the dewatering location will be used for both this being base dredging event as well as used during future maintenance events. Next slide. So to support the preparation of the alternatives analysis and prepare for the future design, field investigation activities were performed between November 2020 and March of this year. Activities included hydrographic survey, which was performed to support updating the dredge volume estimates and identify major debris that could impact dredging. Sediment testing was performed to identify the composition of the sediment in the lake, as well, which will help inform the potential dredging methods, dewatering methods, and disposal options. Bench scale dewatering tests were performed to support evaluation of the dewatering method and included a focus on geotextile tube dewatering. And last, the soil testing was performed to identify geotechnical conditions along the shoreline and support evaluation of potential pipeline alignments. Next slide. For the alternatives analysis, the criteria against which the various components of the project were evaluated were developed in consultation with Fairfax County. These criteria were grouped in 4 major categories, including park management, community, environment, and construction and dredging program operations. Component-specific subcriteria were also developed for each of the project components evaluated during the alternatives analysis. Next slide. So again, to reiterate some of the assumptions that were made to support the analysis, the target final water depth after dredging is 8 feet. So based on the recent survey and anticipated ongoing sedimentation between now and the end of the project, that corresponds to a dredge volume between 450,000 cubic yards and 500,000 cubic yards, depending on certain options. The overall construction schedule we assume to be 3 years, But to account for the time needed to prepare for the dredging, as well as remove temporary systems after the completion of dredging, active full-scale dredging is assumed to occur over a 2-year period, and that equates to an average dredging rate of 950 cubic yards per day. So now diving into the results of the alternative analysis. Next slide. The first type of evaluation that was performed was a proof of concept screening of potential construction methods for dredging, dewatering, and disposal. These are the actual means and methods for these components will be left up to the contractor. Next slide. So looking first at dredging, next slide. The dredging methods that were evaluated include mechanical dredging, which uses a bucket to remove sediment and debris from the bottom of the lake. There's hydraulic dredging, such as a cutter head dredge, which breaks up the material at the bottom of the lake with the cutter head and pumps sediment and water, creating a slurry to a secondary location. Then the third option that was evaluated is an amphibious dredge, which comes with interchangeable heads for the dredge, so it can act as either mechanical or hydraulic. Each of these methods was evaluated against the dredging evaluation sub-criteria and ranked as either highly compatible, medium compatibility, or low compatibility. The results were included in the evaluation table presented in the exhibits of the alternatives analysis report. If we simplify the evaluation tables included in the exhibit, next slide, we would see something that looks like what's currently being shown on the screen. So because this is a little bit difficult to read, next slide, the way that you'll be presenting the information are these simplified bar charts. So one thing to note is that as part of the evaluation, we did not provide any weight to the criteria. So getting into the actual results of the dredging method evaluation, all dredging options are considered feasible. The main challenges with each of the dredging methods include debris handling for hydraulic dredging. So if hydraulic dredging is selected, there will need to be a separate debris handling operation. For amphibious dredges, those have a low production rate, so you're likely to see multiple dredges out on the lake to complete dredging with that option. And lastly, for mechanical dredging, there's community impacts such as noise and floodplain impacts, and that's predominantly related to the support equipment that is needed for mechanical dredging, such as material scows and or a secondary slurry plant to create the slurry for pumping of the sediment. Next slide. So the next proof of concept screening that we'll look at is the different dewatering methods. Next slide. So the methods that were evaluated include passive dewatering with geotextile tubes, passive dewatering with a desanding option, which can create a material with less fines that may be more preferred for beneficial reuse. The third option that was evaluated is mechanical dewatering, which can include multiple processes or equipment to separate the sediment from the slurry. And the last option evaluated is gravity dewatering with a drying agent. One thing to note about this option is that it's not readily compatible with slurry transport of sediment, so it would be limited to use at dewatering locations immediately adjacent to the lake. So for each of the dewatering methods, the area that is estimated to be required was estimated, and those areas are shown on the screen. And there were certain assumptions that were made for each of these. So the area that's needed for passive dewatering is highly dependent on the ability to stack the geotextile tubes, as well as the need for the time needed for dewatering. For mechanical dewatering, the area is dependent on the different types of processes that are used, as well as the amount of storage or tanks that are assumed to be needed in the system. Next slide. So the results of the dewatering method evaluation are summarized here. The key takeaways are that passive dewatering is simple and relatively low cost, but it does require a relatively flat lined area for operation. Mechanical dewatering can accommodate a higher throughput and creates a drier material, which can be helpful for disposal options, but it is a much more complex and therefore usually has a higher operation cost. So as we discuss the different dewatering location alternatives later in the presentation, one thing to note is that we have assumed a passive dewatering system due to that lower cost, as well as general lower community impacts such as noises. So although we do assume passive dewatering, the intent really is to leave the options open for the contractor as they may have an innovative way to address sediment dewatering. Next slide. So the final proof of concept screening that we'll look at is the disposal location options. Next slide. So in general, the disposal location options can be divided into either multiple different on-site uses, such as using the dredged material to expand the island, restoring banks of nearby streams, or other county uses. Off-site options would include off-site reuse or off-site landfill. Next slide. The results of the disposal location screening indicate that all of the options can be paired with any of the dredging and dewatering methods. Multiple disposal locations may be used, and if an on-site use is selected, it's likely that an off-site option would also be needed based on the amount of material that's being dredged, both for the base dredging as well as handling any future maintenance dredging volume. The benefit of off-site use is that there's no public impacts, but there is typically a higher cost associated with those off-site options. On-site use has a lower cost, but there is generally varying public impacts, such as temporary closures of area where reused material will be placed and potential noise and dust impacts during placement. Next slide. So the next section that we'll cover is an overview of the environmental and cultural resource evaluation performed. Next slide. So the information that is presented in the alternatives analysis report for the potential wetland and vegetation impacts does provide a likely worst case scenario, as the areas are based on a desktop evaluation of any potential features such as streams, wetlands, and vegetation. And it also tabulates any intersection of a potential limit of disturbance with those noted features. Additionally, the initial evaluation does not provide any distinction between a temporary or a permanent impact. And we will note that permits will require avoidance and minimization of impacts to these features. So it's assumed that the actual impacts will be less than those noted in the report. Next slide. So the evaluation of potential cultural resources was also performed at the desktop level and is based on review of the Virginia Department of Historic Resource database for previously recorded cultural resources within or adjacent to potential limits of disturbance. 7 sites were identified based on this desktop evaluation. None of those sites have been evaluated for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, but some of the sites could meet Fairfax County criteria for local significance. Next slide. So next we'll discuss the alternatives for this project, which were defined by the dewatering location and pipeline alignments. Next slide. So a number of potential dewatering locations were discussed with Fairfax County and were narrowed down to the following locations that were included in the alternatives analysis report. North of Braddock Road is Howery Park, Wakefield Park Maintenance Facility, the Wakefield Ball Fields, Dominion Energy right-of-way. Within Lake Accotink Park itself, there's the Upper Settling Basin, then the Lake Accotink Island within its current footprint, as well as an expanded footprint. The last location is the disposal location for the 2008 dredging event, which is a concrete plant. For each of those general areas, various pipeline alignments for transporting the sediment slurry were identified. For locations north of Braddock Road, there's the Cross County Trail, Queensberry Avenue, Flag Run to Port Royal Road, or Flag Run to Interstate 495. Within Lake Accotink Park, there's the Lake Accotink Trail on the western side of the lake. And to the alignment to get to the concrete plant included the Amtrak right-of-way and residential route. Next slide. So combining those different potential dewatering locations with their associated pipeline alignments results in 21 potential alternatives. From this initial list, certain alternatives were removed from consideration during the alternatives analysis process as documented in the report. Next slide. Alternatives using Queensberry Avenue pipeline, which was removed from consideration due to the impacts to the community as well as costs. The Wakefield Ballfield dewatering location alternatives were removed from consideration due to legal impacts and an inability to replace the facility that meets Title IX obligations. The concrete plant dewatering location was removed from consideration as the property owner is unable to accommodate these operations. Next slide. So the we'll now talk about sort of the 12 remaining alternatives that were left in the alternatives analysis report. Next slide. So since the alternatives analysis was prepared, we do understand that county staff have recommended removal of Howery Park alternatives. So while we will see information on Howery Park presented later, we won't go into much detail on those slides. So this specific slide does summarize the results of the evaluation for the retained alternatives shown in the report. The results of this include the results of the dewatering location evaluation, as well as the pipeline evaluation combined into a single graph. Again, as previously mentioned, there is no weighting of criteria shown. So alternatives with lower compatibility rankings are shown with fewer low compatibility rankings are shown on the left. And as you move to the right, the number of low compatibility rankings increase. One item you may note on this slide is that the island options, ICF and IXF, do show higher portion of green. And this is due to these options or these locations not requiring an onshore pipeline. So all of the pipeline criteria are rated as a high compatibility. Next slide. If we were to separate this out and look at just the dewatering location evaluation, the results would look similar to what we're seeing on the screen now. Again, with locations that have the fewest low compatibility rankings shown on the left. So we'll actually step through the different alternatives in the order of the dewatering locations shown here. That's the Wakefield Park Maintenance Facility we'll cover first, then move on to the Dominion right-of-way, the Lake Accotink Park Upper Settling Basin. We'll quickly show the Howery Park location, and then end with the Lake Accotink Island current footprint and expanded footprint. Next slide. So before I go into detail on the actual results of the evaluation, I do want to give sort of familiarize everybody with the layout of this slide. So for each of the slides showing dewatering location evaluation results, what you'll see on the right is a graphic showing conceptual dewatering layout, assuming passive dewatering with geotextile tubes where that option is feasible. You'll also note in the upper left-hand corner is an anticipated truck route that would be used, including transportation of the dewatered sediment off-site or away from the dewatering location. So on the left, there's 3 items summarized, including a summary of the various areas associated with each dewatering location, including the limits of disturbance and any wetlands, floodplains, or resource protection areas that intersect those limits of disturbance. A summary of the different compatible dewatering methods over a range of dredging production rates is shown in the center. And then at the bottom is a summary of the ratings for the dewatering location evaluation. And this is similar to the results that were shown on the first page, or on the previous slide. So getting into the actual results of the analysis for the Wakefield Park Maintenance Facility, the key advantages of this location are that it avoids closure of park facilities and limits park use impacts to potential trail rerouting. It also has minimal residential impacts from any noise or truck traffic, and it's assumed that improvements can be left in place and maintained for future maintenance dredging events, which will help minimize the cost and time for future mobilization. Key challenges associated with this location are the extent of clearing, as well as its location within the floodplain, which will require certain consideration during design to minimize any downtime due to flooding. So next we'll look at the pipeline alignments for transporting the slurry to the lake, from the lake to the maintenance facility. Next slide. But again, before we dive into the actual results, let me familiarize you with the layout of the pipeline alignment results slides. A graphic for each of the potential retained alternatives or alignments is shown, and key measurements associated with those alignments is presented below the images. To the right of that information is the bar chart summary of the pipeline evaluation results. For the Wakefield Park Maintenance Facility pipeline alignments, the first alignment follows the cross-county trail. It starts at the northern portion of the lake and follows the cross-county trail along the east side of Accotink Creek, crosses Braddock Road utilizing trenchless crossing methods, and continues up the trail until it leaves the trail behind the park maintenance facility. The key benefits of this alignment include that it minimizes impacts and avoids closure to park facilities. There's minimal tree clearing anticipated as the pipeline would follow the existing trail right away. And the cost and schedule benefits due to being the shortest and most direct route to the dewatering facility. The key challenges associated with the cross-county trail alignment is minimizing the temporary disruption to sections of the trail during construction, as well as a majority of the alignment occurring within the floodplain. The second retained alternative alignment is the Flag Run to Port Royal Road alignment. This alignment starts near the marina area of Lake Accotink Park, travels up the Flag Run Valley until turning northwest to follow the Port Royal Road right-of-way towards Braddock Road, where a crossing will be installed using trenchless crossing methods. North of Braddock Road, the alignment turns west towards the maintenance facility crossing under the Wakefield Park entrance. The key benefits to this alignment includes minimizing trail closures, that there's no clearing as the pipe is going to be installed along the road right-of-way, and there are minimal long-term community impacts. The key challenges with this alignment include potential short-term impacts to the west of the Flag Run for construction access to that portion of the pipeline alignment. Short-term traffic disruptions along Port Royal Road would also be anticipated. Constructability challenges along Flag Run due to the presence of the floodplain and stream would also be another challenge associated with this alignment. Short-term disruption to the Wakefield Park access road during that initial construction of the pipeline may also occur. The third alignment is the Flag Run to I-495 alignment, which is very similar as the previous example, running through the Flag Run Valley, except that it follows the I-495 right away instead of Port Royal Road. So the key advantages and challenges of this alignment are similar to the previous one, except that there are fewer traffic disruptions as the alignment is behind the industrial complex. Next slide. So moving on to our next dewatering location, the Dominion right-of-way. The key advantages of this location include that it avoids and minimizes tree and wetland impacts due to the occurring within the cleared areas of the existing right-of-way. It's anticipated that any improvements will be able to be left in place and maintained for future maintenance dredging events. The key challenges with this location include its being within the floodplain, which will again require certain considerations during design to minimize potential downtime due to flooding. Another consideration and challenge is the general accessibility of this area and truck access to the dewatering location, including both the truck traffic on Wakefield Park, as well as identifying available areas for those trucks to wait to be filled with dewatered sediment. One key unknown with this location that could change how it is ranked is any potential use and area restrictions within the utility easement. So as an example, if the stacking height of the geotextile tubes is limited, either more area will be needed to perform the passive dewatering, or dredging production rates will need to be reduced, potentially extending the schedule. Next slide. So looking at the alignments for transporting the sediment slurry between the Lake Accotink and Dominion right-of-way, you'll notice similarity south of Braddock Road, the alignment shown for the maintenance facility. The advantages and challenges associated with those sections are similar. So focusing instead on the sections that are north of Braddock Road, all of these alignments are the longest of the retained alignments that were evaluated, and that's due to the location of the dewatering location. For the alignment along the cross-county trail, this longer route does mean the potential for increased trail disruption during construction. Although this alignment does have fewer utility crossings and a lower energy use due to a lower change in elevation when compared to the other two alignments to the Dominion right-of-way. So north of Braddock Road, the advantages and challenges associated with the Flag Run Port Royal Road and Flag Run I-495 alignments are similar. These alignments were identified to minimize short-term disruption to the Wakefield Park Road, as well as minimize tree clearing by following existing cleared areas. Challenges for these alignments is access for operation and maintenance activities and temporary road closures where the alignments follows the Wakefield Park Road. Next slide. So for our next dewatering location, we're moving to within Lake Accotink Park itself, and we're looking at the upper settling basin, which is located to the west of the lake. This area was previously used for disposal of sediment during the 1980s dredging event. The key advantages for this location include its proximity to the lake while being outside the floodplain. This proximity will allow for easy return of water to the lake using the existing infrastructure that remains from that 1980s dredging event after it has been repaired and improved. It's also assumed that any improvements that are installed for site preparation will be left in place and maintained for future maintenance dredging events. The key challenges associated with this location include the ability to accommodate the dredging production. It is assumed currently that the limits of disturbance that are currently shown will be outside the areas that was previously used in the 1980s event. Additionally, there will be a need to either close or significantly restrict use of the Lake Accotink Trail along the western side of the lake that connects the dewatering location to Rolling Road, as this will be the main access point for truck traffic. And due to the proximity of that access route to residents, there is likely to be noise impacts to those residents adjacent to that access point. Another key challenge with this alternative is that it would result in permanent wetland impacts. So there is a cost to mitigate and a need to relocate the stream if this site is chosen. Key unknowns with this location that would change how this location is evaluated include the existing soil conditions and any preparation requirements. So as I mentioned, the 1980s dredging event deposited sediment spoils, so we would have to confirm the ability of those materials to support the future dewatering activities. Additionally, the stability of the existing embankment would need to be evaluated, and any improvements needed to support truck access would have to be determined. Next slide. So the pipeline transport for transporting the material from Lake Accotink to the upper settling basin is shown here. The pipeline starts northwest of the dam and follows the main trail leading up to the settling basin. The key advantages of this alignment include that it is the shortest pipeline alignment evaluated and is the most straightforward from a constructability standpoint. This alignment is located entirely within Lake Accotink Park, so there's no external property owners or easement holders involved. Besides temporary trail disruptions, no disruptions to park facilities are anticipated. The key challenges with this alignment include the recreational impacts due to temporary disruption to trail access during construction of the pipeline, as well as potential community impacts due to truck traffic from Rolling Road to the northern portion of the alignment. Next slide. So we'll skip fairly quickly through these next two slides as Howry Park is no longer being recommended for use as a dewatering location. Next slide. Next slide. So again, moving into Lake Accotink Park, the next dewatering location that I'll discuss is the current footprint of the island within the lake. This location is not compatible with geotextile tube dewatering, so the conceptual dewatering layout shown assumes that gravity dewatering with drying agent would be used. The key advantages for using this location is that no pipeline is required, as dredged sediment would be able to be transported by barge to the island for dewatering. Additionally, this location is located within the lake, so water return would be extremely easy and return directly to the lake. In addition to not being able to accommodate the passive dewatering, other key challenges for this location include accessibility. All material and equipment would have to be transported by barge to and from the island. And given the limited existing water depth within the lake, there is a potential that barge transport could be limited. Additionally, this location is located entirely within the floodplain and is predominantly wetland, so there would be floodplain and wetland impacts associated with the use of this location. Then the final key challenge associated with this option is the residential impacts due to trucking, as all trucks leaving the site would follow along residential areas. So those areas would see an increase in traffic as well as noise from the trucks. One key unknown that could change the evaluation of this location is the existing soil condition of the island and its ability to support dewatering activities. Next slide. So the final retained dewatering location is the island, but with an expanded footprint. Assume the island would be expanded to create a land bridge connecting the island to the adjacent shoreline. The key advantages for this layout include, again, no onshore slurry transport pipeline is required. It also has an ease of water return to the lake. And because we would be building a land bridge, there's the potential to design the area to accommodate multiple dewatering methods. The key challenges for this location include that it does reduce the overall lake footprint. There are trail and potential impacts and potential closures that would be needed to allow truck access to the location via the land bridge. Additionally, trucks would be traveling through residential areas, so there would be residential impacts in the terms of increased traffic and noise. And finally, one of the things that would have to be considered, especially during the initial construction, is that accessibility. Similar to the discussion on the previous slide, any initial construction would have to be by barge until that land bridge is constructed. And then it is assumed that that issue would become minor and minimized due to being able to access the island via that land bridge. So key unknowns associated with this location include the surface and subsurface conditions of the island and the land bridge area and their ability to support the proposed activities. Additionally, we assume that the dredge material would actually be used to build that land bridge. So the ability of the dredge materials to be reused in the land bridge would need to be further evaluated to confirm that it can support trucking activities. Next slide. So that concludes the summary of the key benefits and challenges associated with the dewatering locations and the pipeline alignment components of the retained alternatives. So I'm just resharing this slide as a snapshot of what the results look like when you combine the dewatering location evaluation and the pipeline evaluation for each of the retained alternatives. Again, we're showing the alternatives with the fewest low compatibility ratings on the left and increasing number of low compatibility ratings on the right. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time and attention, and I'll now turn things back over to Charles.
Thank you, Amanda. Next slide, please. And one more. So I wanted at this point to kind of close the presentation with sharing with you the staff recommendations. So at this point in time, the staff recommendation is to leave the dredging options open, well, primarily with hydraulic dredging and mechanical debris removal. This means that likely the material will be pumped out of the lake to the work area and then via pipeline, and that we would use large machines to remove debris such as trees from out of the way of the barge. The pipeline options we'd like to leave open again to retain some flexibility during design. We'd like to look at the options that have the lowest impact environmentally and to the community resources, recreational resources, but also cost. And then the last component of this is to retain consideration for up to 4 potential locations for dewatering. This in Wakefield Park, that would be Dominion right-of-way, in Lake Accotink Park, the settling basin, also in Wakefield Park, the maintenance area, and lastly, the Lake Island within Lake Accotink Park. The reason for keeping open the options during the concept design phase, as Amanda indicated earlier, is that we may see flexibility as a way to be more efficient in dredging and minimize impacts as well as control costs. So by doing that, if we put it into one location and lock it in there, we may really increase impacts to a particular resource or community and or increase costs. Next slide, please. I want to reiterate that staff are no longer recommending that Howery Park be considered as a dewatering location. Next slide, please. I also wanted to share that one of the principal goals within the design will be to minimize impact to the cross-county trail and maintain trail traffic. So those are key objectives to whatever alternative we choose and how we implement. Next slide. So we're going to open it up. I'll turn it back over to Judy in just a second. I do want to remind people, again, please utilize this opportunity to ask your questions and make your comments, but also it doesn't end here. We're open until August 22nd for comments, and you can submit those through the project webpage, and we'll share that information here shortly again as how to get in there. Judy?
Thank you so much. What an amazing presentation. I know it seemed a little bit long and maybe a little bit complicated, But that's what the next part of this program tonight is about, to answer your questions and to make sure that you understand what was presented. The good news is there'll be more opportunities as we move forward. So thank you. And now on to the most important part of the meeting, which is public comment. I promised I would go over how this works again, because this too is a little complex. So for the duration of the meeting, we'll be accepting comments and questions in the public input chat box. If you can't see the chat, please refresh your webpage. And if you want to dial in and you want to speak to us over the phone, please call the number located right above this video, 855-925-2801. You can enter the code then right above this video, 8809. Once you dial in, the recorded message will ask you to press star for more options. And if you want to join the speaker queue, press option 3. That is going to put you into the speaker queue, but that will still allow you to listen to the message. At this point, again, you might want to step away from your computer because there is a delay and it can be a little bit confusing. Plus, again, we'll hear ourselves twice through your phone. I should tell you, by the way, we have 101 people who have joined us this evening. So that's terrific. We're glad that people turned out. When it's your turn in the queue to speak, we're going to let you know that we're ready for your call. And the pre-recorded voice is going to prompt you that it's your turn. So we'll ask you to state your name and to make your comments or to ask us that question. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and then we'll give you a 30-second warning that you're nearing your time. Remain on topic. And again, I will go over this as often as needed. So let me start by reading one of the comments from Avril Garland. Using the island in Lake Accotink as a dewatering site avoids laying a pipeline and taking away land from parks. Barges and trucks would carry the dried silt away. Although this would present inconveniences, it seems the least bad option. What do you think of using the island in this way? Who'd like to comment on that?
I think that's exactly why this was a consideration. I think that this came from Arcadis staff as a creative potential solution to minimize impacts overall and keep although it does pose challenges potentially, it does also simplify some aspects of the operation. So I think you're right, and that's why as staff we're recommending we continue to consider the island option as we move forward with design.
Avril, we thank you for your question. All right, we have a question from the Friends of Lake of Accotink Creek, Phil Latassa. Can you clarify the nature and footprint of gravity dewatering? Is this for you, Amanda?
Yeah, I think this one is for me. So as far as what the footprint of the gravity dewatering area looks like, it's pretty much a bermed lined area. So that would be sort of temporary in nature. There would be an underlying stone pad. So I believe that was sort of what you were getting to. So that's sort of what it would look like in operation. And then there'd be the geotextile tubes on top, and those, after they're filled, the material would be removed and transported away from the dewatering location.
Let me go to my team now. And okay, yes, I knew there would be more. Okay, this is from Anonymous. I appreciate the efforts of the county and Arcadis teams to develop plans for dredging Lake Accotink. It's a complex project, as folks have noted. Why isn't residential impact, noise, or truck traffic listed as a key challenge for the Dominion ROW dewatering alternative? What specific analysis has been done to assess impact of noise in Wakefield Park and in the neighborhoods on the east side of Wakefield Chapel Road? And just to provide some context, they add, if you live in the neighborhoods on the east side of Wakefield Chapel Road, you know that noise carries through Wakefield Park. The Beltway is loud and you can hear it more often than one might expect. The dredging project calls for 95 truckloads round trip per day, starting at 7 a.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. on weekends for 2+ years of dredging activity. So would anybody like to comment on that?
I'll comment briefly. I think you're correct. This would definitely need to be part of the analysis as we went forward with design. I think the key is that it is comparatively puts the trucks the furthest from any residence. So that's the key, is that it is, somebody pointed out, it's kind of a lesser of evils in this case. In order to accomplish it, we do need the trucks to haul material out. And this particular alignment, although as you pointed out, would not be without impact, at least would, in first look anyway, would have a much lower impact than some of the other alternatives, but it would require more analysis.
Thank you. Lee offers this comment: any option that requires the least amount of tree clearing has my vote. Sounds like keeping it in the park is the way to go. Trail closures and such are just part of the deal. Comment on that perspective relative to tree clearing? No? Okay, we'll move on. Friends of Accotink Creek, again, Phil Latassa. Would the flag run portion of a pipeline route be underground, be possible without extensive tree loss, be coordinated with the planned stream restoration, or have impacts on the stream restoration?
I think you've nailed it there. We would anticipate the need to really plan carefully to minimize impacts to the stream valley. But in addition, we do have on our work plan the restoration of that portion of flag run from the beltway to the lake. We've completed last year the restoration upstream of the beltway. So this would, we would hope, make them coincide, so we could potentially bury the pipeline while conducting the stream restoration and minimize the overall impacts. So that would definitely be something we would look at as a potential way to conduct that.
Thank you. Let me ask the team, are there any other comments? Anybody on the phone line that's waiting to get their input? I'm reading from several screens, so if you just give me a moment to scan to make sure that I have not missed anything or anybody. I would encourage you to ask your questions, because we want to make sure that you are really coming at this from the perspective of knowledge. It's a big project, and it's very, very important, and it's going to be one that lasts quite some time. I'm told there are no more comments so far, and we don't have anybody on the phone line.
Just a quick comment for the phone line. Remember to press *3 if you would like to leave an audio comment for us or speak to us.
Okay, so as I noted at the beginning, there's a little bit of a delay from where we're coming from to what you're seeing out there. So I want to give folks a moment to catch up in case they decide that they want to. We'll give you just a couple more moments. And let's see. Here's another from Mr. Latassa. Could there be an option for a slower dredge to reduce trucks per day?
That's certainly something we could look at to reduce impact. We'd have to balance that with cost. Also, there's a couple other factors, is that trucks per day for a shorter duration versus trucks over a longer duration, and what's the trade-off. Another thing to consider is the lake continues to silt in. So the longer you prolong the dredge, the greater the quantity of silt that accumulates while we're dredging. And that may increase the total amount of material to be removed. So all that would have to be balanced, but certainly something to consider.
And that's a perfect segue into the next question from Kurt, which is the project fully funded? I'm going to let the supervisor answer this, because I know we addressed this question the other night.
Yeah, well, I think as you've seen from the presentation, we're still working towards finalizing the cost estimate. So we're approved for application of up to $60.5 million worth of funds. And the commitment that we made to the Board of Supervisors is to go back to the full board when we have something closer to a final cost estimate and get and get approval. So I think the answer to that question right now is we don't know, but we'll be public and transparent about that as we know more, and any additional funds will have to be approved by the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Again, from Mr. Latassa, fish and eel passage solutions need to become a part of the future life of the dam. Is that something that perhaps Mr. Burke wants to address, or Charles?
We talked about this with the Friends of Accotink Creek a few years ago. We also talked to the Department of Wildlife Resources for the state. And what we came up at this point in time, consideration of fish passage is not part of this particular project. So we're looking at dredging and not dam modification. But we did get some preliminary information from the state experts on fish passage, and it's certainly something we can discuss going forward. So it'd have to be a community park authority in particular as the owner, and the state to help us with that conversation.
Thank you, Charles. Are there any other comments or questions that, all right, here's another one from C. Greg Carroll. Talk more about the relationship between the lake and the bay. Which option manages the bay damaging stormwater best?
Of the dredging options, I'm not sure any one is particularly different. One of the things Amanda could maybe just discuss briefly is that Arcadis has looked into the fact that in order to discharge the water that comes out of the dredge material, we have to treat it. So I think the answer is that all of them would remove a lot of sediment and continue to keep that sediment out of the system below the dam. And maybe Amanda, you could talk a bit about how you have to clean the water once you treat.
Yep, so any of the water that would be, so from the sediment slurry, any of the water that gets separated would be required to meet discharge permit requirements. So, they're either material coming directly from like the geotextile tubes that may be able to be discharged directly. If there's other options, there may be a secondary solids removal phase prior to the water being discharged. But the goal would be that the water quality being returned to the lake is at least as good as what was pulled out, if not better.
Thank you both. We have two more comments. Avril Garland asks, sediment keeps entering rivers from private properties or yards. Has the county a plan for education outreach for homeowners to keep stormwater on their properties?
We do continue to do outreach education. I'll say that probably the project that's going to help us with that conversation the most is one that's also in Braddock District. It's the Long Branch Central Watershed Management Area Project, which is now underway. It's a partnership with Park Authority and Public Works and many stakeholders in the Long Branch Central watershed. And that project is looking at not only what can the county do to stop sediment generation within the channels, but also working with the community to look at strategies to reduce runoff from the uplands on all the private land and to improve quality of life through things like natural landscaping. So yes, absolutely, that's a critical need and something that going forward will be something that's important for all people that participate in the community to take a part in.
And I think you might have addressed part of Frank Christian's question, which is what actions are being proposed to reduce the amount of sediment coming into the lake in the future?
So there are many projects going on in the Accotink drainage. I think there are more projects than any other drainage area in the county, and those are from the Providence District, the Mason District, the majority of them being in Braddock District, and then we have some downstream also. But we have projects all the way from Nottoway Park, in that area up near Vienna, down through the main stem over Mantua neighborhood, Annandale Community Park, Wakefield Park. We finished Truro several years ago, Long Branch Central Watershed Management Area, Danbury Forest. We're doing a project right now on the main stem of Lake Accotink at Wakefield Park. So we have a lot of activities. We're certainly very committed to that. And as you mentioned, continuing to work with all the stakeholders to try to cut the loads in the future in terms of runoff and sediment generation.
We have an anonymous comment. Despite the Beltway expansion, Wakefield Park is hanging on as a wonderful oasis for county residents and wildlife. The county should think carefully about selecting an alternative that further degrades Wakefield Park to save Lake Accotink, perhaps temporarily. All Wakefield Park options involve clearing trees and vegetation, disturbing wetlands, RMAs, constructing facilities, shutting down or altering trails, and tolerating an increase of truck traffic and noise over a multi-year period. The Dominion right-of-way option also takes the project out of the county's control, as Dominion can alter or change requirements. I hope that the county focuses on dewatering and pipeline alternatives within the Lake Accotink footprint, which, while presenting challenges, will not result in the degradation of Wakefield Park. Food for thought. Thank you. We appreciate that comment. Mr. Latassa, deterioration of the upper settling basin is currently returning the 1980s dredge sediment directly to the lake. Its failure has catastrophic potential. It must be repaired as part of this project. Comments?
Yeah, and we really appreciate the Friends of Accotink Creek bringing that to our attention, and we've looked at that. We certainly have that on our list of things to look at, and we will work hard to consider whatever option we do, how we can address that particular issue with the plumbing from the 1980s dredge operation, and how its current condition and how we can prevent it from worsening, potentially repair it as part of this project.
Sean Newman writes, thank you for the great presentation. For the CCT and West options, how long would the trails be closed to recreational and transportation users? And what would the final trail look like, paved or something else?
Amanda, would you like to address that one?
Sure. So the intent and goal is to minimize any impacts for any trail. And it really depends on which of the options. As far as like the pipeline alignment, the goal would be to leave that option. We don't know yet if it's going to be above ground or underground. We would leave that up to the contractor. But again, the goal of minimizing any impacts or closures. And what the expectation would be is that the actual trail itself would be similar to what it is existing now. So there wouldn't necessarily be a change from, a gravel trail to a paved trail.
Thank you, Amanda. I do want to remind folks that you do have the option to speak to us over the phone. And if you want to, you can call in at 855-925-2801, enter the code 8809. And then a recorded message will ask you to press star. It'll give you some other options, and you can press the speaker queue, press option 3 if you want to talk to us live, as they say. Okay, we have another comment here. Anonymous, what is the best medium to provide our vote, in quotes, for which methods we prefer based on the information provided? So the best method is probably going to be to provide comments online through the DPWES page and portal. We're taking comments until August 22nd. I do want to reiterate that it's not a vote, and I'm glad you put that in quotes, because we know at the Park Authority, sometimes we get hundreds and hundreds of comments really on both sides of an issue. So all of this information will be taken into account based on the comments, based on the kind of input that you're giving us tonight, which is so gratifying to see people caring as much as they do.
Judy, there's a comment, there's a question from Kurt about, will the project go out for bid when ready? How many dredging companies are out there, ballpark? I'm going to answer the first part of that, and I'm going to ask Mike Woodman from Arcadis to jump in. So the first part is the state directs localities on how we bid projects. We likely will use one of two methodologies. One's called construction management at risk, where we engage a contractor early during the design phase, and they help us finish design, and they can often help us do some problem solving. The other option is to complete the design and do what's called a design bid build, which should be we get to the end of the design and permitting process and we go and put it out for bid. Mike, could you maybe jump in and talk a bit about the contractors?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Charles. Can you hear me okay? Great. So yeah, there are several contractors in the area that could accomplish a project like this, and I think I pointed out during last week's meeting too that this is the kind of a project that would attract interest really from contractors on a nationwide basis. So I think that we expect to see ample interest in a project like this if it was to go out to bid, or at the time it did go out to bid. So it's likely to draw significant interest and to see a number of bidders respond.
Thank you, Mike. And it's really gratifying to know that more people have joined. We're up to about 125 people who are participating this evening. Again, from the Friends of Accotink Creek, the current island dewatering site option presents the least negative environmental impact with least sacrifice of trees and habitat. It does present a nuisance factor for neighbors that would need to be managed. Okay. Are there any phone calls at this time? Any other
None.
comments?
No phones at this time.
Thank you. All right, well, Charles and Supervisor, perhaps we'll take a moment to kind of summarize and then we'll close out tonight's meeting. Would anybody have some final closing thoughts before we say goodnight?
Well, I just want to thank everyone, the team that pulled this together, and the 100 plus. I'm not sure. I think we were over 120. I think you said, Judy, 120 folks who joined tonight to hear the presentation, and especially those of you who gave your feedback or asked your questions. And as Judy noted, the comment period will remain open through August 22nd. So I encourage you, if you didn't share your perspective this evening, or even if you did, please visit the DPWES project website to give us your comments as this process continues. So thank you all. Have a great evening. Charles, anything else? Anything I missed there? Feel free to jump in.
You didn't miss anything. I was just going to add a couple quick comments. We wanted to thank everyone again. We do again appreciate the fact this is a lot of information, and please encourage folks to, if you have the opportunity, to go to the website webpage and look at the alternatives analysis that's posted there, so you can get further evaluation. As we've said before, we have until August 22nd on the current public comment period, but we'll continue to take your comments throughout this project. It doesn't stop. We will be trying to keep the lines of communication open with the community and making sure we're providing as much information as possible. A reminder that once we get all the public comment, we'll be going back to discuss it with the Board of Supervisors as well as with the Park Authority Board, keep them updated. And then we would want to give direction to Arcadis in the September timeframe to keep them on track for design. So that'll be the next phase. And we can report out to the community in the September timeframe as we move forward and share with everybody kind of the decision process based on the public input.
And Charles, one of the strange things about doing virtual is that there's almost two time frames. So even though we were closing out, they may have just found that out. So if I might indulge, we've received about 3 or 4 more comments real quick. If I could just add these so that people do know that we did see them. Avril Garland, could we have more than one dewatering site? That would mitigate the use trucks disturbing residential areas.
That's absolutely something I think we should consider. By keeping flexibility, and maybe the contractor will come up with some different strategies. Arcadis has been very creative in looking at strategies. But yes, I think we certainly should consider the possibility. On one hand, it could add a lot of cost and complexity and spread the impacts out and have larger impacts. On the other hand, it potentially could, as you indicated, maybe lower the overall community impacts. We definitely should consider it, I think.
And then Lee Wagoner, I agree with Philip that the island will have the least environmental impact, and that should be the most important factor. And then another from Anonymous. This is going to be the last comment I take because I always like to end on a really high note. Thanks to Supervisor Walkinshaw, county staff, and Arcadis. Great presentation and well-researched data. What more can we say except be well, be safe,